quiet stretch of rural Nova Scotia was jolted awake on May 2nd, 2025, when two young children vanished without leaving behind the slightest trace. The disappearance set off a chain reaction of urgency, confusion, and escalating concern as multiple agencies mobilized almost instantly. Viewers following this unfolding investigation should hit the subscribe button and turn on their notification bells to get first-hand updates on this case and others like it, because what began as a search has evolved into one of the most intricate forensic efforts the province has ever seen. The morning of May 2nd began like any other in the quiet community, until it didn't. When the children were reported missing, the initial assumption was that they had merely wandered off, a scenario that, while frightening, was not unheard of in areas surrounded by dense woods and winding trails. But from the outset, something felt different. The RCMP mobilized immediately, accompanied by local police units, volunteer fire departments, search and rescue teams, K-9 units, and even wilderness experts familiar with the terrain. Within hours, helicopters swept across the tree canopy while ground teams fanned out in coordinated patterns. The urgency grew as early search hours passed without progress. Normally, missing children leave indirect signs, footprints in soft earth, broken twigs, dropped belongings, or at minimum, a scent trail for search dogs. Yet none of those indicators appeared. The property where the children were last seen offered no workable directional clues, forcing search leaders to expand their radius far faster than they normally would. By the end of the first day, more than 100 people were actively searching, and by day 2, the operation had reached numbers typically reserved for natural disaster recoveries, not small community missing person cases. Every nearby residence, outbuilding, farming shed, trailhead, and body of water was examined. Drone teams covered marshlands and open fields, while ATVs combed through rugged backroads that would be impossible to reach on foot. Water rescue specialists dragged ponds and banks even without any indication that the children had gone near them. The scope of the operation grew so quickly that emergency coordination centers had to bring in logistical support just to track assignments and manage communication. Despite the scale of the response, authorities could not ignore a disturbing pattern emerging early on: the complete lack of physical evidence. The environment itself seemed to offer no answers: no scraped earth, no pieces of clothing snagged on branches, no belongings dropped as if in haste. It was as though the children had simply been removed from the landscape, leaving only questions behind. That silence in the physical environment weighed heavily on the investigators, planting the first seeds of doubt that this was a simple case of wandering off. By the end of the first week, officers acknowledged publicly what they had already been whispering in private briefings. Traditional search methods were failing, and the case was drifting into territory that demanded a much more technical and investigative approach. That shift would redefine every next step in the inquiry. One of the most unsettling elements of this case is not what was found, but what wasn't. As search teams meticulously combed through the property and surrounding routes, they confronted a stark and unnerving truth. There was absolutely no physical trail indicating how the children had exited the area. It is exceedingly rare for two children to move through rural terrain without leaving at least a partial trace. Even experienced hikers cannot move silently through brush without disturbing ground cover or vegetation. Yet every methodical pass through the property yielded the same negative result. Search dogs, typically one of the most reliable tools in missing child cases, could not maintain a consistent direction. Handlers noted that while the dogs initially showed interest near the home perimeter, the trail evaporated almost immediately, as though the scent had been abruptly interrupted. This absence of continuity raised an immediate red flag. Scent trails do not simply end unless a person is lifted from the ground or enters a vehicle, possibilities investigators could not ignore. Equally troubling was the lack of any credible eyewitness accounts. Rural communities often rely on neighbors who know each other's routines and notice unusual sounds or movements. Yet on the night of the disappearance, no one reported seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary. No late-night vehicles, no unfamiliar voices, no distress sounds, nothing that could act as a starting point for investigators. The property itself also provided no indication of forced entry or struggle. Doors were secure, windows intact, and the surrounding soil undisturbed. There were no drag marks, no impressions indicating hurried movement, and no evidence of clothing fibers or debris that could suggest the children had run off or been forcibly removed. In many investigations, it is the small, subtle details, a smudged footprint, a snap branch, a displaced object, that help rebuild a timeline. In this case, every piece of the physical puzzle was not missing, but entirely absent. This void in tangible evidence forced investigators to broaden their considerations. If the children had not walked away and had not been observed leaving, then what had happened during those critical minutes? Authorities began leaning heavily toward theories involving controlled transport, someone taking the children in a manner quick enough, quiet enough, and deliberate enough to avoid detection. While this remained only a possibility, the absence of alternative explanations increased the urgency of exploring every technological, digital, and surveillance-based lead available. The shift from traditional ground searches to a more forensic, evidence-driven approach was not a decision made lightly. It reflected a growing concern that whatever happened on that property involved planning, intention, and knowledge of the area's isolation. That shift deepened the emotional weight of the investigation and raised the stakes of every new lead. By the second week, officials faced an undeniable reality. Despite the magnitude of the search, traditional methods had hit a dead end. The absence of footprints, scent trails, eyewitness accounts, or discarded items forced investigators to pivot toward the only remaining avenue, technical forensics. This shift marked a turning point in the case, signaling that the investigation was now entering a far more complex and meticulous stage. The first step in this new strategy was a comprehensive sweep of all available digital data. This included surveillance footage from nearby homes, farms, roadways, and commercial buildings, any location within a multi-kilometer radius capable of capturing vehicle movement or unusual activity. Investigators also called upon telecommunications specialists to analyze cell tower pings, data requests from personal devices, and signal anomalies that could indicate phone shutdowns or location masking. Digital forensics teams collected devices from individuals connected to the family, ranging from personal cell phones to tablets, GPS units, and even vehicle infotainment systems. These devices often store data that users believe is deleted, including navigation logs, Bluetooth pairings, and location histories. Recovery teams use advanced extraction tools to retrieve fragments of deleted files,